So many clones, copies, replicas, and lookalikes of the Colt single-action Army revolver have come from Italy in the last few decades that new ones hardly gain notice anymore. But several years ago, when I heard there was going to be a single-action revolver put out by the Taurus company of Brazil, my ears did perk up. Taurus has been known primarily for its double-action revolvers and semi-automatic pistols. I had to wonder what they would come up with for a single-action revolver. I finally had the chance to review one, a loaner from my son-in-law, and it is with many thanks to him that I can tell you all about it. Argentina is known for tango and lesser recognized gauchos, skilled horsemen, reputed to be brave and unruly. Paying homage to the Gauchos, Taurus produced the single-action Gaucho revolver, a predecessor of the Taurus Deputy, now available from Taurus and its distributors. The Gaucho has some fascinating features for Taurus's first single-action revolver, but to get to those features, basics have to be covered first. The Gaucho sounds, loads, and unloads like a Colt single-action Army. These points mean that the hammer is pulled to the half-cock notch, which in turn frees the cylinder for rotation so cartridges can be inserted or ejected one at a time by means of a loading gate on the frame's right side. As the hammer is being pulled back, it gives those 4 distinct clicks, so identified with a good old peacemaker. With the old Colt, the first click occurred when the hammer was pulled back into its so-called safety notch. The Gaucho also has a click as the hammer reaches that notch, but the Gaucho, as with the Colt single-action Army or its clones, is not meant to be carried with the hammer resting in that notch. It is meant to be carried with the hammer fully down. The Gaucho looks and behaves like a Ruger new model, in that it has a transfer bar system of ignition instead of a firing pin mounted on the hammer. The Gaucho has a hammer with a series of steps, none of which will touch the frame-mounted firing pin unless the trigger is pulled. When the trigger is pulled, a piece of steel raises between the hammer and firing pin, which transfers the energy from the falling hammer to the pin. The Gaucho can safely be carried with 6 rounds loaded, as opposed to the Colt single-action Army and most of its clones, which can only be carried safely with 5 rounds loaded and the hammer resting down on the empty 6th chamber. The Gaucho cylinder shows it's more related to the Ruger than to Colt and most Colt clones. That's because there is no separate cylinder pin bushing, as with Colt single-action Armies, pressed in or slip fit. That's not a problem, unless the revolver gets fired so much that the cylinder develops end shake, which could happen after shooting thousands of rounds through the revolver. The transfer bar safety negates the use of a firing pin on the hammer, like that found on Colt single-action Armies, and most clones of, to ignite a primer. This might bother some single-action Army purists, but given that the Gaucho is safer to handle over the Colt single-action Army, and most clones of it, it is something that I can live with. The full-blued revolver, as this one is, looks pretty good. The only variation is the seemingly color case hardened hammer. The finish of the frame and that long 7.5-inch barrel matches up pretty close enough to give a uniform look to the revolver. Pre-finish polishing has left most edges smooth and void of burring. Atop that 7.5-inch barrel is a high-profile blade front sight, trailing edge of which on the specimen has been painted white to help in locating it against a dark background. Really didn't help that much at the range though. A shell-shucking spring-loaded ejection rod is housed within the ejector rod assembly, which is mounted in its usual single-action revolver location alongside the barrel. The ejector rod housing screws directly to the barrel instead of into a stud inset into the barrel, as with Colt single-action Army. This is a common thing with replica single-actions, and it may be a small point. However, if someone is not adept with a screwdriver and strips out that screw hole in the barrel, well, a trip to the competent and licensed gunsmith may ensue. Just forward of the cylinder on the left side of the frame is the spring-loaded cylinder rod lock and release button. Does its job well, as I will talk about in a bit. The fluted cylinder holds 6 .45 cartridges of the Colt type, as is indicated by the very large chambers and that very large hole at the end of the barrel. The flash gap, the cylinder to forcing cone gap, measured out at 0.04 of an inch, and although it is a tight tolerance, all phalanges of the hands should remain far away from that gap. The cylinder is locked up tightly with no detectable side or fore and aft play, whether the hammer is at rest or fully cocked. All in all, Gaucho is a very tightly fitted revolver. Frame markings, thankfully, have been kept to the minimum with Taurus on the left side of the barrel with the single-action 45 LC on the right side of the barrel. Serial number is stamped on the underside of the barrel near the frame. Right side frame markings consist of Made in Brazil, while the left side frame marking consists of the source of manufacturer and importer, accompanied by the Taurus logo. I'll get into the action in a bit, but first let me present what allows one to hold on to the revolver: the grip. The hard rubber grips deserve a few words. They are nicely done with very fine checkering and the Taurus logo in a circle. They are also not overly thick, as with some replica single actions or Colt's own hard rubber grips. They also fit the grip frame nicely, meaning each set are on the revolver's grip frame as it is polished, instead of just having been made in large batches and screwed onto a revolver indiscriminately. Also, the shape of the Gaucho grip frame closely approximates a Colt single-action Army's frame, and since their frames are handheld during polishing, no two are exactly alike. The action is very clean. The hammer is surprisingly easy to move rearward, while hearing and feeling the 4 distinct clicks that take place. The first position of the hammer, as mentioned, is considered a safety notch that no one in their right mind should be using as such. The second notch, as is usual, is the loading and unloading notch that frees up the cylinder for performing such actions. The third notch being a pass-through and very subtle notch that allows the hammer to be lowered to the second notch, if so desired, before fully cocking the hammer, which leads me into the fourth click, the cocking notch. When fully cocked, it only takes 1 pound 6.8 ounces of average trigger pull to drop the hammer. There is ever so slightly amount of trigger take-up, but one would really have to be looking for it. The break is crisp and clear as a winter's morning, and the hammer drops with authority. With the Gaucho, you really need to be mindful of trigger discipline, lest you discover just how light the trigger is when the Gaucho is not pointed at what you want to hit. As with most Colt single-action revolvers and cloned revolvers of, the mainspring is a leaf spring and not a coil spring, as found in the Ruger single-action revolvers. This feature, with others, and aside from the transfer bar safety, says that the Taurus Gaucho is a single-action revolver that will serve your needs, whatever that might be: target shooting, tin can plinking, or competition. The Gaucho also has another feature that needs to be mentioned: a key lock safety. You will find this feature at the rear of the hammer. Like it or not, key lock is part of the Gaucho package. 2 keys are provided with the revolver, should you decide to use this feature. I will say that the key lock opening is hardly noticeable, and Taurus opted to place it in an unobtrusive position, rather than in a position where it could readily be seen. Regardless of the transfer bar safety, the Gaucho disassembles and assembles just like any other single-action revolver. After a safety check is made to determine that the revolver is empty and safe to work on, the hammer should already be in the second notch, the loading and unloading notch. Simply press the spring-loaded cylinder rod lock and release button inward to release the cylinder rod. Support the cylinder while removing the cylinder rod, and rotate the cylinder out from the right side of the frame. To assemble the Gaucho, insert the cylinder rod slightly into the frame until it butts up against the cylinder rod button. Then, roll the cylinder counterclockwise into the frame. Do not force the cylinder into position, as it needs to be in proper alignment with the ratchet and hand, and you will feel the cylinder fall into place when it is. It will take some dexterity on your part to align the cylinder directly with the cylinder rod while pushing the cylinder rod release button in, while, at the same time, pushing the cylinder rod inward until it locks into place. Once the end of the cylinder rod is past the cylinder rod release button, you can release the button and the cylinder rod will continue to the rear of the frame from there. Once the cylinder rod can no longer be pushed inward, double check that the cylinder rod is, indeed, locked into place. Now, do not pull the trigger with the hammer in the half-cocked position. Doing so can damage the revolver. Fully cock the hammer, and using either the thumb or finger pinch method to support the hammer, pull and release the trigger. The hammer can then be controlled in its descent into the frame. I don't pull the trigger on a single-action revolver, in fact, any revolver, unless I fully support the hammer or have snap caps installed, regardless if the single-action revolver is a Ruger or otherwise. That's just me, and you can do whatever you want with your own revolver. As far as care and cleaning, I leave that up to you, but I do recommend following instructions for such as contained in the user manual. Just as a heads up, I decided to forego an indoor range session and brave the elements to take it to my favorite outdoor range. Would you like to go along with me? I knew you would.
glasses on. You need to keep your glasses. Keep your glasses on. It's too much metal flying around in here.
For a first attempt at producing a single-action revolver, Taurus did a fine job with the Gaucho, in that, while it does mimic the 4 distinct Colt clicks when cocking, and while it does incorporate a transfer bar safety system like a Ruger single-action revolver, and also contains a discrete key lock safety for storage, Gaucho is a fine-looking, handling, and shooting single-action revolver. I thoroughly enjoyed my range time with it, and I believe that you would as well. Well, my friends, it seems that I am at the end of this chapter in the Range Running Chronicles, and I really like the fact that I could share it with you. Stay tuned to the channel, because more firearm and other reviews are forthcoming. Until we cross paths again, take care of yourselves, be vigilant, armed, and most of all, be safe out there.